I realise I'm stood between us and lunch, so I'm going to make it interesting. So I'm going to talk to you today about experience. And why designing for experience is, in my opinion, arguably one of the most important things that we need to consider when we're shaping and crafting technology. I think of experience as a 21st century innovation. So if you don't really understand human behavior, how are you meant to shape the technology that you're designing to support that human behavior? And I think it goes a little bit deeper, because when I look at the organizations in terms of how they think about experience, what I'm beginning to see, or what's well known now, is that where, say, customer experience was considered a top board priority in 2018 and 2019, what the kind of analyst companies are saying that by 2020, 2021, experience will be the most dominant factor that you'll need to compete on. It's quite interesting, because I think that when you look at some of the world's leading disruptors, you know, the likes of Airbnb and Uber and things like that, Spotify, you know, when you kind of go on Spotify, a company that's done 18 AI acquisitions within the last 4 years, they don't really talk about technology. They talk about experience. They talk about music discovery. It's a very subtle difference. Of course, you couldn't have an amazing technology like Spotify without technology. But it's not the technology that they talk about. They talk about the experience that delivers value and meaning to how people want to live their lives. It's a completely different way of thinking. And this is why I consider it to be a 21st century business problem that we could solve. So I've been doing this experience design stuff for, I was trying to work it out the other day, about 24 years. And when I started off, I would say to people, well, what is the purpose of this technology we want to make? What is it meant to do? How do we want people to feel? How do we want them to react? And they would look at me and go, Simon, what are you talking about? And I'm saying, well, what is the experience we want to design? And they would say, Simon, this sounds like witchcraft. I just want you to make me a website. So I would say, okay. And then in about 2008, something wonderful happened. This concept of experience design started to take a foothold. And I would say, you know, within the last sort of 10, 11 years, experience design has gone from something that's kind of important to now the most demanded design discipline in the world, with many people competing and many organizations competing on delivering a better experience. I'm lucky to work with some really talented folk that all have the same idea as me, that designing technology is about humanizing technology. And I'm lucky that they kind of work in these three great locations. And I'm lucky that I'm able to work with clients that also have that same ambition, that ambition of wanting to deliver a better customer experience, because they believe a better customer experience will be something that actually not only adds value to them as an organization, but adds value to the people that interact with that organization. I'm very lucky to work for such an amazing scientific organization like the Met Office, and see things like the D-Day weather forecast, which is just up there, just in case you wanted to know, which I thought was pretty cool. So, what is experience? Such a simple question. Really, it's quite a complex question. In fact, some people would argue that, you know, outside of the behavior in the human brain, there is nothing more complex that we're trying to understand right now in the world. We know so little about it, really. That's why we use the word correlation instead of the word cause. But let's dive into what that means from a design perspective. So, experience. What is it? Why is it so important? Let me give you an analogy. Let's take St. Paul's Cathedral. Beautiful. A masterpiece of architecture, no doubt. Absolutely breathtaking. If I deconstructed the cathedral into its component parts and I looked at it from above, it would just be a bunch of stuff, right? And when I put it together, and putting these things together requires complicated processes, the walls, the windows, the domes, it becomes something more. It becomes greater than the sum of its parts. It becomes a cathedral. Experience is a lot like that. And what I mean by that is, to understand experience, you have to appreciate, A, it can be designed, and B, what you're designing is patterns of experience. It's a kind of micro, macro factor to all this stuff. Let's take the old way of how we did things. And it's not the old way, it's just, the 20th century way. How we would buy wine, go into a shop. We still do that today. How we might use the technology, like our watch, to tell the time. How we might watch the television. Today, in our digi-modern epoch, is very, very different. It's a very different world. Technology has embedded itself so deeply into what we do that we can now unlock our car from our watch. We can watch the program that we want to watch, where we want to watch it, when we want to watch it. We can see a review about a bottle of wine that we like and make sure that we're certain with that choice, knowing that hundreds of other people have rated it highly. This is a completely different world, a completely different thing to design for. It seems so simple to measure them in time, but psychologically and behaviorally, these worlds are different. Embedded experience is kind of the thing that's emerging right now. I've got this little video of how people buy trainers. This is the kind of stuff that my son does. Dad, I want to buy some new trainers. What do you think of these? Check it out. Super cool, right? I think it's super cool that we are starting to do things in a very different way, an augmented way, this blending of technology. How do you design for those sorts of experiences? And it comes down to a simple idea that experience design, in particular, does not come out of a spray can. You can't experience design a bad product or a bad service or a bad technology. Can't do that. It's impossible. And I put this up as part of amusement to myself because today, in 2019, I still get asked to do that. Simon, can you UX this thing? And I kind of take a gulp, think about it, and then I might say something along the lines of, is that your car out there, that lovely black car? And they go, yeah. I'm like, love that car. I said, do you think you could take that car into the garage and get it painted red and actually expect it to go faster? And they look at me like, well, no. And I'm like, well, that's the same thing with experience. Experience needs to be designed, embedded from the very beginning to achieve what we want to achieve. And we heard it said up upstairs in the AWS presentation, where they're kind of, taking the genius of the late Steve Jobs, where he would argue that you start with experience and you go backwards. You think about the experience you want to design, the way you want people to feel, and then you think about the technology. And the thing about experience is that experience, to add further complexity, is something that we remember. You have an experience to remember, right? Because that is different to experiencing. Experiencing is your conscious flow of thoughts and feelings. Experience is what you remember. We are always experiencing. You are experiencing right now. What you will remember is what you will have experienced. And once you understand that this is a pattern way of thinking, a problem pattern way of designing, you can design great experiences. However, there are problems that are kind of looming, okay? I call it the technology dominant thinking problem. Look at these Honma golf clubs, $75,000. Any golfers out there in the audience? Does anyone think that those golf clubs are going to improve your handicap? Of course not. They may make you feel good. You may look cool on the course. It may make your status go up. But will it improve your scoring? Absolutely not. Impossible. And the way I think about it is there's this misconception that technology, or specifically digital transformation, will lead to better experience. And it repeats over and over and over again. Let me just give you some accuracy over this concept. The success rate of digital transformation projects is slightly better than the odds of winning at the casino, which is about 13%. There are very few examples that actually could demonstrate success doing this. Furthermore, I don't think you ever complete digital transformation. It's like what the Met Office has to do in terms of computational power to improve accuracy and predictability. It has to improve computational power because it's never enough. So the question is, what is the design behind the design when you're designing experience? And that leads you to this idea that, well, if technology doesn't lead to better experience, how do you do it? Because if you don't do it, you fall into this mindset problem where you think that technology is the way forward. And there's absolutely no competitive advantage today in technology. Not when it comes to designing experience. Let me give you an example. Who's seen the adverts about freezing your card functionality from Barclays and seen that? They didn't invent that. They copied that. That's their best copy. That was invented by Monzo a few years back as one of the things that they thought would actually start to change the way people experienced and interacted with the bank. Now, the thing about that is that, and Starling Bank copied it within a month. These are new challenger banks. They move a lot more quickly. I understand the idea about legacy technology. The point I'm illustrating is that is the feature is not the thing that has allowed this company to kind of move towards achieving 2 million customers, to becoming a unicorn, a potential disruptor on a massive scale. It's how they deliver experience. The freeze feature is but a microcosm of supreme experience interwoven into how you get information about your finances and how they treat you. It's deeper than just the technology. I've learned more about banking since being a Monzo customer than I've ever learned by being a business owner or a CEO in humanized, simple language. That's what they should be copying, not the feature. So the way that we kind of recommend it is we talk about this idea that you take digital transformation and you take design, as in you need to design the technology, and what you really want to do is create what we call an experience transformation. And when you do that, what happens is you deliver better customer experience. When folk from Amazon talk about customer centricity, Apple, these organizations, they talk about it, these unicorn businesses, these businesses that are disrupting the world, they're applying a really simple idea called customer focus. You can't just have it on like an objective and go, hey, we're going to be more customer-centric. Customer centricity is an outcome of a certain way of thinking and behaving and designing. So let's kind of bring all the kind of theoretical experience stuff to some relevance and show you some of the work that we did collaborating with the Met Office team. And I used a word there, collaboration, because organizations like us, we don't just turn up and throw our stuff over the wall. What we do is we come in and we understand. We look at the lay of the land and we go, do you know what? This is what we can do together. It's not I'm telling you, it's more a case of let's show you through research and evidence and collaboration. It's what Pixar call plussing. There are no bad ideas. There are no judgments. There is only better design that leads to better experience. That's all we really care about. So with the Met Office, people talk about personas. And these personas are kind of foundational elements that have allowed us to bring together a whole bunch of research. And the way that we're talking about these personas is this is not a man named John who's 49 and actually looks at the weather like that. That's just mind-numbingly crude and meaningless beyond imagination. We're all these different personas. We're all vulnerable. We're all doing research. We're all scheduling. These are lenses through which we look at how people access and process weather information. And what we do is we say, right, what are the channels that they use? Offline and on. We've come up with this trianglegram, which is about the activity and the location and the time they are looking at the weather. And these factors change. Sometimes it might be more about the time. Sometimes it might be more about the location. They're fluid, dynamic. And then we kind of balance that with the kind of commercial segments that the Met Office has already established. We think about it in terms of the actual priorities that these people might want to basically achieve and the goals that they're looking to complete. It's a different way of thinking about information. And we do that because it gives focus and allows people that are going to be designing this stuff, building this stuff, empathy. to actually design with the customer in mind. We then take all that information and we represent it in what we call customer journeys. And these are journeys through how people use weather information specifically. We'll then think about the pain points that they have, the opportunities that they can create, and we will map that information to what is called user stories. And user stories are like the baton exchange behind the design and the development. And the fact is that when you design user stories from the ground up in this way, they're much more rigorous and evidence-based. They transcend, opinions of like color and I think. It's a bit more scientific. And then we have bits of information that people will say along the way in research. As a user, I need to know at which point I can begin to trust the forecast. Trust the forecast. They're not meteorological scientists. I'm not a meteorological scientist, but I want trust. And then we think, right, how do you take all that information and you put it into a document that engineers and developers could use to help them make this design come to life, make this experience come to life. And we focus on aspects about how they want to do what they want to do, about the journey they're going to take and the pain points within that journey. And there's a little bit of information about them, but it's not specific, it's general, because we're all this persona at some point, in some way. It'll just give you an example of how this stuff comes together in terms of a design. Surf instructor. So looking on Fistral Beach, he's thinking about what the weather potentially is going to be like because he's got a bunch of people that he needs to train, teach. Look at the fact that the UV and the pollen iconography at the top. So there, without going into greater detail, this is us demonstrating that the vulnerable persona. Let's say, there are people that are going to go to a different location, like they're going to go out in the country on a walk. They really want to know about the pollen count. So you surface this information so it's super easy to access and to understand. So a great design should accommodate all those personas in all the different ways that you want to do things. We're not designing for one, we're designing for all. And ultimately, all this stuff is packaged together in a way that allows the system to be scaled. So great design work is scalable. For example, we have to think about information structures. We have to think about how people navigate things. We have to think about the composition of pages in great detail. So the experience that we design is absolutely crafted to represent and actually cover what we've researched and understood. Hard to see on this screen, but one of the design insights that we uncovered, you look at most weather apps. What color do you think they are? I'll tell you. They're blue. Now, we think an organization with such scientific pedigree, like the Met Office, and a way to differentiate yourself is to have a more serious color, like black. So this is purposeful. This is not just how it's structured. This is something more deep about what you want to communicate in terms of status and meaning of organization. There are many things that we're trying to hit when you're designing an experience We're designing for many different types of people, persona. And we're detailed to think about this is how the information needs to be structured, because this is how people make decisions. This is how you make this stuff, how you compose it, you put it together. I call it the recipe. You don't just show someone a video of making a souffle and not give them the recipe right, but you'd be surprised how rare this type of stuff is. These type of design systems represent the difference between great experience and good experience. These type of design systems stop the problem of continual redesign. We don't want continual redesign, we want continual improvement. And the reason why many things break is because they don't create a design system, a design behind the design. And the problem with that is when you don't do that, you then get into the tricky world of opinion with all the cognitive biases that go with that. I think it should be like this. I think it should be like that. This color, this shape, this size. I'm much more about, well, we'll test that and prove that. Often what we're designing is not for a specific individual. It's for people that we're never actually going to meet. So we need to have a very big picture mindset. We have to think not just in terms of the materials that make up the cathedral, but when you put those pieces together, how it emerges something bigger, better. I'm going to finish with this quote by someone that I've admired for a long time, well, since I was 18. McLuhan, I've paraphrased it and I'm going to read it out. Everybody experiences far more than they understand. Yet it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior. This, to me, is the homage of creating a golden thread that connects what you design, why you're going to design it, and how you want to make people feel, because you're mindful about what you want them to experience. This is a very different way of thinking about designing. And something that I think, together with the Met Office, that we've done a brilliant job on. Thank you.